Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. So in this paper, I argue for a minimalist account of shared agency. Specifically, I defend the view that we're engaged in shared agency just when our respective activities enact a common plan of action that might, but need not, figure in the content of shared intentions. So let me first explain why I believe we need a minimalist account of shared agency. Shared agency theorists, just like individual action theorists, have shown a bias for the conscious and the intentional, or to use David Velleman's apt phrase, a bias for action par excellence. In shared agency theory, this bias has found its most significant manifestation in the widely held view that, as a conceptual matter, shared intentions are necessary for the performance of shared activities, a claim that I'm going to refer to as the necessity claim. Prominent accounts have had some success in their treatment of shared activities where participants in small number are tightly knitted and their psychological states narrowly overlap, as when we paint our house together. By contrast, they've had a much harder time handling cases where participation is automatic and unthinking, as when we get off a packed New York City subway car, cases of reluctant participation, as when the firm that we have little choice but to work for pursues morally dubious ends, and cases where the number of participants is high, as when we get a shot as part of a vaccination campaign. The bias for agency par excellence, in short, has led action theorists to an all too narrow understanding of shared agency. The problem with this narrow understanding of shared agency is not just that it might misclassify some shared activities as mere parallel individual actions. The problem, in other words, is not just one of extensional inadequacy. This narrow understanding has also obscured the plurality of jobs that the concept of shared agency does for us. Prominent accounts have primarily focused on the perspective of voluntary participants in shared activities. For such participants, understanding their conduct as a contribution to a shared activity surely primes a disposition for mutual help, mutual responsiveness, and team thinking. In short, the sort of behavioral dispositions that shared agency theorists have often included in their accounts. However, priming such cooperative and phenomenologically rich dispositions is arguably not the only job that the concept of shared agency does for us. For one thing, the possession of these concepts enables us to plan shared activities, and from the perspective of the planner of such activities, it may not matter much whether every participant intends the achievement of the shared endeavor. What certainly matters instead is that things get done, an outcome that is made sometimes more likely if the performance of the shared activity is suitably insulated from the vicissitudes of the participants' psychologies, and in particular from their individual intentions. The concept of shared agency also figures prominently in social science, and in particular in social critique of oppressive patterns of collective activity. For instance, a critique of gendered roles might observe that when a woman in a straight relationship does the majority of domestic chores, she's not acting merely in her capacity as individual agent. Instead, she's been sharing her agency with her husband as part of a plan in which he gets to have a career and she ends up in the back seat, taking care of the logistics of his success. In examples of this sort, one aim of the social critique is to reveal that what might have seemed to be expressions of individual agency are in fact enactments of a common yet oppressive plan. Another goal of social critique is to shed light on the mechanisms that explain the persistence of that common plan, and in particular, the oppressed party's ongoing and perhaps unknowing participation in the enactment of that plan. Planning shared activities and revealing shared agency in the mode of social critique both call for a minimalist account of shared agency, one where participation does not crucially depend on the agent's psychology, and in particular, the agent's intentions and doxastic states. So I've just explained what motivates my search for a minimalist account. This minimalism, however, should not go all the way down, for otherwise, shared agency theory would lose all focus. In this section, then, I offered two adequacy criteria meant to keep this sought-for minimalism in check. First, an adequate account of shared agency should not conflate collective causation and shared activity. Using an example from John Searle, consider a bunch of people in a public park. They're caught off guard by the rain, and so they run to the park gazebo to take shelter. In so doing, they might have damaged the lawn. However, damaging the lawn is obviously not something they did together, not at least under the sense of together that shared agency theory is supposed to focus on. Second, an adequate account of shared agency must do justice to the fact that shared activities, just like individual activities, are purposive. This purposiveness manifests itself in the fact that the adverb together in sentences ascribing shared activities generates substitution failures. To illustrate, let me slightly change the previous example and ask you to consider the dancers of an outdoor company who converge on the park gazebo together as part of their choreography. Suppose in addition that in so doing, they too have damaged the lawn. Now, from the fact that the dancers ran to the gazebo together, it does not seem to follow that they damaged the lawn together, not at least under the same sense of together, even though damaging the lawn and running to the gazebo are both true descriptions of what they did. The reason for this substitution failure is that of these two descriptions, only the latter, namely running to the gazebo, indicates that which the dancers aimed to achieve. In light of this discussion, here's then another way to articulate my second adequacy criterion. Adequate accounts of shared agency must explain the substitution failures generated by the adverb together in shared activity description. It might seem at first that the most promising way to arrive at a plausible account of shared agency that satisfies the two adequacy criteria is to endorse the necessity claim. That is, again, the claim that as a conceptual matter, shared intentions are necessary for shared agency. First, activities that satisfy intentions we share are obviously excellent examples of shared activities, and not just mere examples of collective causation. Second, the necessity claim suggests a straightforward explanation of the substitution failures that the adverb together generates. If shared intentions were necessary for shared agency, then the intentionality with an S of together would reflect the intentionality with a T of shared intentions. However, the necessity claim does not sit very well with my desire to offer a minimalist account of shared agency. And what's more, the necessity claim is false. Consider again the dancers of the outdoor ballet company. After all, they need not share the intention to run to the gazebo, or indeed any other intention, in order to converge on the gazebo together. Closely sticking to their individual roles in the choreography surely does the trick just fine. Let me flesh out this suggestion. Suppose you are a rather narcissistic dancer of the outdoor ballet company and wish that you did not have to share the audience's attention with the other dancers. Should we fail to show up on the day of the performance, you will not bother to contact us and ask us what happened. Indeed, you would gladly perform alone. If that were the case, you would not be committed in any way to the collective nature of the performance. All the same, even if, just like you, we all stuck narrowly to our respective parts in the choreography, we would still be giving a performance together. This argument, inspired by Scott Shapiro, strongly suggests that shared intentions are not necessary for shared agency. This denial of the necessity claim and the intuitive appeal of the adequacy criteria I argued for earlier create a puzzle. If shared intentions are not necessary for shared agency, they do not hold the key to the substitution failures generated by the adverb together. But if they don't, then what will? So I am now going to present my positive account, namely a minimalist account that satisfies the two adequacy criteria while doing away with the necessity claim. But before I flesh out my view, let me just say a couple of words about my approach. My view has two main components: an analysis of the concept of shared agency in terms of the notion of plan, and an account of the mechanisms that enables us to form and carry out plans, and therefore to share our agential powers. Necessity claim theorists have not made this distinction. In fact, the necessity claim combines both mechanism explanation and conceptual analysis. But as I argued earlier, shared intentions are not necessary for shared agency. There must then be other agency pooling mechanisms in addition to shared intentions, and it is therefore a mistake to analyze the concept of shared agency in terms of the concept of shared intentions. So here's what to expect in what follows. I will first offer a mechanism-neutral analysis of shared agency in terms of the notion of plan, and I will then briefly mention two mechanisms that enable the formation and enactment of common plans. So here's my analysis of shared agency. We act together if and only if our respective activities enact a common plan. Now question, what is a plan? Well, at the highest level of generality, a plan specifies how an item with connecting parts is supposed to operate. For instance, the plan of a watch specifies how that watch is supposed to work, that is, how its different parts are supposed to behave. Similarly then, a plan of action specifies a blueprint for a collection of activities. To give an example, the plan of action behind a complex production process explains how that process is supposed to go, that is, how the tasks are divided, when and how each task should be completed, by whom and with which tools. Plans of action do not specify how different activities are supposed to interlock just for the sake of it. They serve a purpose or set of purposes. That said, it is important to stress that two activities that serve the same purpose are not ipso facto part of the same plan of action. Suppose you and I pick up plastic bottles and cigarette butts at Rockaway Beach. Our activities serve the same purpose, namely cleaning the same beach. But they need not be part of the same plan. You might have your plan and I might have mine. Enacting the same plan is a more robust notion, therefore, than pursuing the same purpose, and it is the former, not the latter, that holds the key to our understanding of shared agency. Often, steps of a common plan of action will be tightly intertwined. For instance, your tasks might depend on whether I succeed in completing mine. Should I get hurt as I'm playing soccer, it is your role as substitute to be warmed up and ready to enter the field. I contend, however, that a collection of activities need not be so tightly intertwined to count as parts of the same plan. In refraining to use plastic straws, I may well be doing my part in a campaign meant to get rid of such straws, even if in that campaign my refraining and other people's refrainings do not enter into any specific relations. Conversely, a collection of activities might be tightly knitted and yet not count as the enactment of the same plan. Think of two boxers locked in a clinch. In short, it is neither necessary nor sufficient that a collection of activities be tightly intertwined for it to enact the same plan of action. Much more should be obviously said in order to support my claim that common plans of action are necessary and sufficient for shared agency. But for the sake of time, though, I suggest bringing this section to a close. Before I do so, however, I just want to check that this analysis of shared agency satisfies the adequacy criteria that I spelled out earlier. Obviously, this analysis satisfies the first criterion insofar as it does not conflate collective causation and shared agency. Ordinary park goers might have damaged the lawn as they each ran to the gazebo to take shelter. Yet, in doing so, they clearly did not enact any common plan. My analysis, therefore, keeps collective causation and shared agency distinct and focuses attention on the latter. My analysis also suggests an explanation of the substitution failures generated by the adverb together. The dancers of the outdoor ballet company might have damaged the lawn as they converge on the gazebo, and as a result, damaging the lawn and converging to the gazebo are both true descriptions of what they did. But though they converge on the gazebo together, it is not true, or at least it is misleading to say that they damaged the lawn together, given that it was not part of their plan to damage the lawn. This concludes my analysis of the concept of shared agency. I now set out to explain in greater detail some of the mechanisms that enable the formation and enactment of common plans. Shared agency theorists have virtually all focused on shared intentions. In this section, I sketched two other agency pooling mechanisms which, when deployed, suffice for the performance of shared activities. The first kind of mechanism features a central planner, for instance, a choreographer. The planner forms a plan through an episode of practical reasoning and makes sure to decompose that plan into sufficiently specific roles. A collection of agents, in turn, enact the plan by following their roles. There are at least two ways through which a collection of agents might follow their roles, hence satisfy the planner's plan. I might psychologically commit myself to my role by forming an intention to follow it, whether or not I also commit myself to the broader plan of which my role is a part. Alternatively, I might be merely nudged into following my role. In some train stations and subway tunnels, Footprint stickers stuck on the ground indicate paths, which when followed, ensure smooth traffic of passengers. I take it that most of us follow such stickers mindlessly. However mindless, our following of these footprint stickers is surely enough to carry out the planner's plan that the traffic of passengers obey a certain logic. Note in passing that cases involving behavioral nudges offer an illustration of shared activities where individuals might share their agency unknowingly. Indeed, commuters following footprint stickers in a subway passageway need not realize that in so doing, they are participating in a plan meant to avoid collisions and congestion. Shared activities that result from this first kind of mechanism are moderately minimalist. What makes them shared is the planner's plan and the psychological processes involved in the formation of that plan. The second and more speculative kind of mechanism does away with the planner, thus enabling a strongly minimalist sort of shared activities. The idea of plans without planners, perhaps odd at first, is in fact a familiar one in evolutionary theory. In this picture, a plan is the outcome of a history of selection. Roughly, it specifies how a selected item operated at the time of its selection. One major insight of evolutionary theory is that selection does not necessitate anyone's intentions. In fact, smart plans might arise through the aggregation of rather unintelligent processes. Now, here is an application of this package of ideas to shared agency theory. Suppose you and I are trying to get off a packed New York City subway car. We come from two different directions and we're therefore badly in need of a common plan to avoid a collision. My suggestion is that that common plan might be the outcome of individual trials and errors. We both step forward at the same time, but then immediately stop moving not to bump into each other. And then, after a couple of rounds of trials and errors, we eventually home in on the pattern of direction and speed that enables us to exit the train while avoiding a collision. Now, notice that trial and error is structurally similar to Darwinian selection. First, each trial introduces variation. Second, successful attempts form the basis for subsequent cycles of trials and errors. And third, trial and error is a fairly rudimentary cognitive process, yet likely to home in on smart solutions. These remarks, together with my example, therefore suggest that roughly Darwinian processes might lead to the emergence of common plans of action. It is time to conclude. In this paper, I have argued that we need a minimalist conception of shared agency, one in particular that does not deem mistakenly that shared intentions are necessary for shared agency. I have also argued that this minimalism should nonetheless be kept in check by two adequacy criteria. Here they are. First, adequate accounts of shared agency should not conflate collective causation and shared activities. And second, adequate accounts should explain the substitution failures generated by the adverb together in shared activity ascription. The minimalism and these criteria have created a puzzle, which I have subsequently solved in two stages. First, I have analyzed shared agency in terms of the concept of common plan. Second, I have briefly described two agency pooling mechanisms that do not rely on shared intentions. Thank you so much for listening.